Hello, I'm Alex, and I'm going to teach you guys a little bit about 3D animation. So I would suggest that you look into 2D animation to begin with because 3D, as you can already see here, is really, really complicated. But if you're really interested, then you can start here if you'd like. So this is what Blender looks like when you open it at first. So Blender is a free program. I should have the link in the description if you want to download it on your computer. I'm working with a Mac interface, so if you have Windows, it might be a little bit different, and just be aware of that. But both Windows and Mac are able to download Blender. So this is what it looks like when we first start off. So I'm going to click anywhere on the screen, and then we can see our cube. So for Mac, I have a trackpad. So all I have to do to look around with my camera is use 2 fingers and move the trackpad around. If I remember correctly, if you have a mouse with Windows, if you click down on the mouse scroll wheel and move the mouse, that should do the same thing as using 2 fingers. So let's look at what we have here and some little interface things before we get going. So obviously we start off with a cube, but we don't have to keep that cube. Some other things I want to point out. Over here is our camera. We'll be going a little bit more into depth about that when we actually start animating. And then this is a light source over here. So that circle with the dots around it. You can choose different light sources to put in there, but we'll look at that again a little bit later. So some other things that we can see here on the bottom, I can move it up a little. This is going to be our animation frames. So that's where, similar to 2D animation, you have to create different frames to show something moving. So I can't just take my cube and drag it everywhere to show motion. I have to actually create different frames. And the perfect thing with Blender is that you can create keyframes. So keyframes are things that are every maybe 5 frames. And since this is a really complex computer program, you can say, well, on my first frame, I'm going to have my cube down here. But on my 5th frame, I want to get all the way up here. So if you put a keyframe in for your 5th frame, you don't actually have to animate everything between 1 and 5 frames. So then it's just really simple. Computer just does it for you, and it usually looks pretty good depending on how complex your animation is. But we'll look more into how to actually create keyframes later. So that should be about it for the interface. Okay, so now that we have object mode figured out a little bit just for zooming and looking at our cube, if we actually want to start moving our cube or anything that you have here to move and animate, we're going to want to go to edit mode. So edit mode is basically anytime you have to move anything. It kind of can look like sculpting too in some ways, but I'll show you that in a second. So to start off with, I want to make sure that our cube is selected. So if I select over here, obviously my cube has been deselected. When it's orange, that means that our cube is selected. So now to make sure that my cube is selected, because it's not anymore, I want you guys to make sure that you have this highlighted. So this is one of the tools. It's a select box is what it's called, but it's going to be what we use to select the cube. Now you can also select different parts of the cube. So if I just hit this corner or vertex of our cube, that's going to only select the vertex. So you can see that the orange is only on this corner, and it's a little bit of a white dot here showing that selected. But just for this, I'm going to show you guys, I'm going to select everything. So a real quick tip with Mac, like I've said before, I can just zoom in using my trackpad. If you guys have Mac, you probably know how to zoom in. But if you don't have Mac and you don't have a scroll wheel on your mouse or something like that, there is a zoom button right here. So if I click this zoom in and out, I have to hold click, and then I either move on my trackpad or move my mouse. So if I move my mouse and hold click on the magnifying glass right there, then you can see I'm zooming in and out. So that's right here, our zooming function. Okay, so now that we have our box selected, I'm going to teach you guys 4 different tools with the edit mode. So just as a reminder, make sure you should start off in object mode when you open up Blender, but make sure you're in edit mode. So that's at the top left corner of your screen. So I know all of this stuff really looks complicated. Honestly, most of it we're not going to touch because this is just basics. A lot of the things that if you have questions on, I would say look it up online, because there's a million different directions I can go with this tool, but I'm really just giving you guys the basics. I'm not even going to really get into how to paint things or put different colors to your characters. I'm just really giving you the basics. So now we're going to look at the 4 tools. So you have the move tool. Now, a special thing with Blender, you guys probably have already noticed it, we have that single 2D plane. So that's our gridded section that the box intersects, right? So it's just like you guys might have learned it in school, maybe not yet. There's 3D axes. So you know the X and Y axis probably from your math classes, but there's also the Z axis. So our Z axis is going to allow us to go up and down. So here, I'm still on the move tool, but I have these 3 arrows. So I'm not exactly sure which axis is which, but I would guess that our blue axis is going to be our Z axis, and that's putting us up and down. So that's going to be one way for you to move around. There's also the green one to move this direction, maybe the X axis, and then the Y axis moving this way. And if it helps you guys, you can also move your camera around. I showed you that before, hopefully either with holding down the scroll wheel of your mouse and moving your mouse around, or if you have a trackpad on my Mac at least, I don't know if it's the same with Windows, using 2 fingers on your trackpad to move around and look around. So yeah, if it's easier, you can look at it in a 2-dimensional way. So now you only have your X and your Y axis so that you know where your cube is going. But then you can always show your blue Z axis to go up and down. So that's the move tool. It's pretty basic. We're going to be using that when we're doing the ball bounce animation. It's your basic moving your thing around. So now I'm going to show you rotate. Once again, our 4 tools we're looking at is on our left side. And we're just on the move tool, which are the arrows that go in each 4 directions. Now we're on the rotate tool that looks like it's arrows going in a circle. So now you can see that our axes colors are still there, but there are no longer any arrows. So this is just going to rotate our cube in different directions. So we can see that the red goes in this direction. So, and then our green is going, or our blue is going left and right horizontally, and our green is going up and down. So it depends on how you are looking, once again. So like if I'm looking from here, my green is still kind of looking up and down, but my blues and reds are doing some weird stuff. So yeah, depending on what direction you are, the rotate will look kind of different. Same with if you're moving something. So if you're like, hey, the blue was supposed to be the one that makes me go up and down. Well, that depends on how you're looking at, right? So that was our rotate. Now we're going to look at scale. So scale is going to resize our object. So that could mean making my cube bigger, or it could mean making a vertex larger, or move the vertex, or create a whole different face of our object. So I'll go into that a little bit later when we talk about selection a little bit more. So first off, scale is on our left side. It's right beneath rotate, and it looks like it's a white box that's moving into a darker box with an arrow. If you hover over it, it should say scale and give you a brief showing of how that works. So now instead of having our colored arrows, we have little boxes at the end of those arrows. So we still have our Z-axis going up and down, and then we have our X and Y axis there. Now, instead of moving it, since we're scaling, that's going to resize. It's going to make either, for our blue, it's probably going to elongate our cube upwards. So let's check that out. So once again, you just click it and hold it, and then move up and down. So I can either make it larger, make it longer perhaps, or make it more squat. And we're definitely going to look at that when we talk about the ball bounce and some of the squishing and stretching mechanics. And then same thing happens here, just depending on which size you want to elongate or make shorter. So that's the scale function. The transform function is kind of all in one. So you can see that we have our lines with the little squares at the end, the cubes. And then we also have our arrows for moving and our rotation. So they all do the same thing that they would. So rotate still rotates, scaling still scales, and then moving still moves. But it's just all in one. So if you find this easier to use instead of switching between these different tools over on our left here, you can just use the transform tool. And a quick note, even before I've got you started on any of your animations, just a reminder, Control Z or Command Z if you're on a Mac, that's going to be your best friend in like all animation, whether it's 2D or 3D. So let's say I move my box over here, something weird happened to it, I don't like it, and I don't know how to move it back. I just Command Z or Control Z on my keyboard, and we're back where we started. So that's going to be your undo. It's super useful, especially when you completely mess up, because in Blender, it's super easy just to create something and then click something wrong, and suddenly it's wacko. And you're like, oh goodness, this is going to take forever to fix. Nope, just Command Z it or Control Z it, and you should be completely fine. So that's going to be our edit tools, transform tools maybe. Now back to selection. So I talked very briefly about vertex. So right now you can see my whole cube is selected. If I click off, now my cube is unselected because I'm back on the very top selection tool. Also select box is what it's called. But I can not select the whole cube if I want. I can only select a corner of the cube, which once again is called vertex. And then I can use my transform tools. So I could move that vertex up and down, and you can see that it's really changing my cube and how it looks. Now I tend to like using the edit mode better than using sculpting when I'm trying to make different things, because it turns out that with a sphere, I'll show you a little bit about what a sphere looks like as well in a second. But with these things, you can easily just select a vertex, move it, make it larger, that sort of thing, and create your character with more polygon looking style than sculpting. But we'll go into the pros and cons of sculpting once we get there. So once again, I have my vertex I selected. I can rotate it. It does nothing because it's a vertex. But basically when it comes to vertexes, you're just going to want to move it because it'll still stretch it. You're not going to really make a corner larger. So when you have the vertex selected, I would just say use the move tool. Okay, so for selection right now, at the top left, once again in edit mode, you should see next to the edit mode branch at the top, you should see these three icons here. So right now I'm on vertex select. So unless I drag and select the whole cube, every time I select something, I should be only selecting the vertex. So even though I selected this edge here, it still thought, oh, you meant to select this vertex because you're in vertex select. So now I can move over to edge select. So that's going to do exactly what you expect. So I selected this edge. Now instead of being orange, it's selected white. Hopefully you can see it. I'll go a little bit closer. Not that it helps. But yeah, so our edge is selected here. Same thing as before. I can move it and completely change my square into a different shape. And that's going to be our edge select. But I can also select a face. So the face of the cube would be just one side of the cube. So the face and the side of the cube are the same things. So now I have my face selected. I can move it, and kind of does the same thing that scale did before, but I can also rotate it, which makes a little different effect than we saw rotate used before. And then I don't know what this, yeah, this is going to scale it up and down. So now instead of scaling the whole cube, I can make like a TV set, right? That kind of looks like an old TV set. And once again, Control Z takes you back where you were. So that should be all for our selection modes. Some other things to be aware of. So I'm still selecting this face here. Now, if you left click, or if you're on a trackpad on Mac, if you take your two fingers and just tap, or left clicking works as well, you should get a menu that comes up. So right now I've selected my face with left click, and this menu comes up. So there's a lot of different things that you can do. Extrusion is something very interesting that we can do, where I have one cube, but say that I want to create another part of my cube that I can say bend away. So like if I were holding up my arm has an elbow. And to be very simple, my top forearm could be a rectangle and my bottom could be a rectangle as well. But with this program, I can't just take a rectangle and squish it and bend it like an elbow would. I have to extrude it. So I'll show you what that looks like. Okay, so I hit extrude face, and now I'm not doing anything. I'm not clicking anything, but I can move my mouse around or your trackpad and show you that, hey, I can create a whole nother cube. So now I have two cubes. You can tell because of this line right here, and I'll zoom out a little bit. So I just extruded that face. So my face is still selected, but I moved another cube on top of this cube. So this is going to be how you want your character to move. A lot of the times you're going to want to extrude a ton. So if you're making a worm, I know you guys have probably seen inchworms before. They have a bunch of segments in their body, those little rings. And that's basically what we can do here. So I'm just going to do the same thing, extrude. And now we're starting to get a bunch of different segments that I can at some point start moving when we learn how to animate. And then you can also bend it like an arm, that sort of thing. I would definitely suggest playing with the move and select tools, because you can find, hey, I thought sculpting would be what I want to do because it's, clay sculpting. It seems like the easiest way to make my character. But really, extrusion and playing with our edit tool could be really useful as well. So now that we have almost exhausted our edit tool, I do want to show you guys how to insert shapes. So we started with a cube. Of course, we can change it to look like anything else. But I do want to show you guys how to maybe insert a sphere or look at the different shapes that we can start with as a base instead of our cube. Okay, so to add a sphere, you can be either in object mode or edit mode, doesn't really matter. You go next to object mode, we have view, select add object. You're going to want add. The shortcut for this is Shift A, but add's just right here. So there's a ton of different things you guys can play with, I would say. Surfaces are great for creating a landscape, but obviously meshes are kind of where we want to stick. So you have plane, cube, circle, UV sphere, isosphere, cylinder, cone, torus, grid, and monkey. So monkey is, as you would expect, a monkey face. But the one that I would find the most useful to create literally anything is our UV sphere mesh. So sticking in the mesh section of the ad, I would say would be probably useful to you guys. You might get lost in the other ones. But the UV sphere is going to be our best bet for basically anything, because there's so many faces. You can see all of these little squares here that are different colors. So those are our different faces on our sphere. So if I go back to edit mode, you guys can see that if I do face select, I can select one of these tiny faces. So this gives us a lot of room to move that face and change it to whatever we want it to look like. And since there are so many of them, we can really see some cool things that you can create with this. And I'll show you some of my own creations later. But yeah, the UV sphere is really what you want to look at. Now going back to add, I talked very briefly about light sources, but once we start rendering our animation, you're going to want to know where to find these. So if I go back here, our mesh, I guess if you go back to object mode, yeah. So in object mode, we see light down here. There are different types of lights. You guys can play around with it. I'll show you how to see what the light source does later, because it has to do with rendering. So I'll teach you a little bit more about this, but this is where you can find your lights under add in object mode. So I can just say point, and then I have my light source of a point out there. Different things here. Let's go back to our lights. Once again, we can delete our camera and put in a new camera. So that is what our camera looks like. It looks like a little box and triangles. So the camera I will talk about more in the ball bounce when we start actually animating. So this camera the square is what you're looking at. So if I zoom into where our camera is, the triangle going outwards is not where the camera is pointed. The square is. It's pretty self-explanatory. And our arrow going upwards, that's going to be our top of our camera. Okay, so we're looking a little bit different in our interface, but just as a reminder, make sure when you're starting up that you move your animation frames up by clicking the edge of it and moving it up, just because we really want to see what these frames look like before we start. So some quick things that I did that you guys can do as well is add your isosphere. So make sure to select your cube, delete it, and then go to Object, Add, and then we should have mesh in there that you can add your sphere, your UV sphere. Some other things, I added some light sources. Once again, we can talk about that a little bit later when we talk about rendering. And this is all ready to go. So this is what it should look like in the end. I'm just going to play it for you guys so you can see what we're trying to do here. So it's cycling, but we have our ball bouncing. So it starts at the bottom at 0. And it just looks like a circle or a sphere, right? But if we go very slowly from frame to frame, we can see by frame 2, I'm squishing it. So that's going to be something that we call stretch and squish. And that's just very simple animation used in 2D, used in 3D that makes a more realistic animation. You're kind of like, wait, balls don't squish in real life. Well, when it comes to cartoony stuff and just making something look more interesting when you're watching it, the squash and stretch are really good for showing speed. So with our squash, I'm just showing that our ball is about to bounce, and then we're going to see it start stretching. So it's pretty squashed now, hardly looks like a ball, but we're going up with some speed, and then we see it slowing down. So that slow down is going to want to squash again to show, hey, we're slowing down, that sort of thing. And we hit our peak around slide 16, frame 16, and then we're going to fall down again. And if I move the camera, or not the camera, but move our view, you can see that it's very squashed down at the bottom by the time that we finish. And then it's back to normal. So you can see these little dots here, these diamonds that are yellow. Those are my keyframes. So instead of actually animating 32 frames, I just have these keyframes to show you guys that, hey, the computer can put all this animation together pretty easily, so why not we let the computer do it. So I'm going to just start from scratch, just show you this is what the end goal is going to be, but then I will walk with you into how to make your first slide and how to start your keyframes and that sort of thing. Okay, so this is at the very start of when you open the program. We still have our cube here, we still have our camera, light source, that sort of thing. I have my cube deselected. It should probably be selected already for you guys. I'm currently in object mode, so I'm going to select it with a box, just my cube. I'm going to left click it or use your 2 fingers if you have a trackpad, and then I'm going to delete it here at the bottom. So now my cube's completely out of the way. I can put my ball in. So remember, we're in object mode. I'm going to hit add, mesh, and then UV sphere, just because it's way easier to work with. So now we have our UV sphere. We're at the very beginning, good place to start. So remember, down here is our animation frames. So you're going to want to take the side of it and bring it up so that we can really see what's going on. We're currently on frame 1, so that's going to be our start. I kind of want my ball to start on top of this grid because it kind of looks like the grid is intersecting our ball, and we don't want that. So I'm going to go back into edit mode. I'm going to move my ball up a little bit before we even start. And we're up on top of the grid. Now remember, even though I moved my animation stuff, I have not actually changed slides. So our frame is currently frame 1. Nothing's going to show up in our animation that shows me moving it up or down yet. Because we have to create our frames to even begin that. So you see the end right here says 250. I don't know about you guys, but I don't want to make a 250 frame animation about a ball bounce. So I'm just going to change it to 20 this time around. So now it's a lot smaller. I can scroll over. I can zoom in to see it. So by zooming in, I'm using my trackpad and using Mac, so that might be a little bit different for some people. Probably your scroll wheel will work as well. So now I can see my 1 to 20 slides a lot better. So we are currently on frame 1. Now I'm on frame 2. So our frame 1 should be completely saved, but I told you guys that before, keyframing is going to save us a lot of time here. So instead of going from frame 1 to frame 2 and actually individually animating all 20 of these slides, I'm going to skip over to frame 3. So I think you can do this with your arrow keys. So I'm using on my keyboard the arrow keys to switch frames. So even though nothing's happening, that's because I haven't saved any of my frames yet or even moved anything for any of the frames. So now that I'm on frame 3, I'm really going to start my bounce. So I want my bounce to look like it's super fast. Now you guys might not have seen this in my previous ball bounce that I just showed you guys, but I do want to change it a little bit. So I'm going to go to scale and I'm going to make my ball look squashed. Of course I deselected it, so I have to reselect it. So once again on scale, and I made my ball look a lot thinner than it actually is. And I can also do it the same way in the green direction. So now we're beginning our ball bounce in object mode. Doesn't really matter what mode you're in as long as you can use the transform tools. So it might be easier to be in object mode because when you select it, you have the whole object. So I'm going to create a keyframe. Okay, so I'm on frame 3. Now to create my keyframe, I'm going to go to keying. So that's in our left, bottom left, next to playback. And I'm going to hit the arrow. And it should, mine's already there, but it might not be there for you. So go to this key in the active keying setting. And then you're going to want to go down to lock, rot, scale. We're going to keep our location, rotation, and scale in our keyframe so that it knows that we're going from our original, from number 1 to number 3. So I'm going to do that and then go back to keying and then press plus. So that has created a keyframe. So if I go back to number 1, you can see my keyframe isn't there. And that's because we haven't created it there yet. So I'm going to make my ball turn back into a ball by using my scale. So now we're back into the ball shape and I'm going to move it down. And this is our starting position at 1. So once again, going to keying, it's already on lock, rot, scale, so I don't have to do anything, and then hit the plus. So now we have 2 keyframes. So I'm going to use the arrow keys, and you can already see that from 1 to 2 to 3, I did not animate the second slide, right? I did not animate the second frame, but it's in between 2 keyframes. So the computer is able to figure out, hey, I think you want to go up and stretch the ball. And that's exactly what I want to do. So I'm going to continue this with number 5. And we're going to go to scale again. Just going to make it a little bit more and then move it up a little bit more. So this is really going fast at this point. And then really don't forget to hit plus here. Otherwise, your changes will not be saved. So that means 3 keyframes. You can keep track of whether or not you have a keyframe. And I'm going to skip over to number 8, just because I feel like it. You guys really don't have to choose anything specific with these keyframes. And I'm going to scale it back to something like a ball and then move it up a little bit higher. So that's going to be our peak. So that's going to be the top of our bounce. And don't forget to hit this plus here. So now we have another keyframe. And I'm going to go a little bit further and do kind of exactly what we did before, where I'm going to stretch it, except we're not going up this time. So I'm going to bring it down. And we're going back down quite a bit. Don't forget to add your plus here. I'm going pretty fast. You guys, don't worry if it takes you a little time to get the hang of these things. So hopefully you can kind of understand what I'm doing. So very lastly, I would like to show you squash. So I've showed you stretch already. That's showing how fast our ball is going. but I would like to show you squashing as well. So this would be our normal ball, but I want my ball to look like it's getting squashed. That looks pretty good. Okay, and then I'm going to move it down back to where our imaginary ground is. You can't actually see the ground in your animation. If you wanted to do that, you would probably have to go to add and then maybe a plane. It's not too hard. I'm sure you guys could do it on your own if you'd like. So don't forget for your keyframe to hit the plus. And now I have my squashed sphere. So now I'm going to go to 17, maybe make it a little bit more squashed just to make it look very smooth. And then make it even thinner. And don't forget to hit plus on your keyframes. And then at 20, I want it to look basically back to my normal ball. And we should be kind of back normal. Even at the end, don't forget to add the keyframe. So if I just cycle through here, I will deselect everything so you guys can see it and go a little bit closer. Okay, so now you can see my keyframes are gone just because I clicked off of them, but they're still there. Don't worry about it. And we can see, I gotta zoom out a little bit more, that our ball bounce is all good to go. Right, so I only animated, what, 7 keyframes, but I have 20 frames just because the computer knows exactly what it's doing. So I can hit play, and it's going to do the ball bounce. So just another quick thing, since I want my ball bounce animation to look as best as possible, you're going to want to put some lights in there, because once we render it, it looks pretty cool in Blender, but if you want to just have a movie or something that you can show to your family, like text it to them or something like that, you're going to want to render your animation. Because Blender doesn't just allow you to say, oh, this looks really cool, let me just grab it. No, you have to render it, and it's not going to look exactly like it does on the screen right here. So I'm going to add a few lights in. Remember, we're in object mode. I'm going to go to add and go to light. So you can choose from point, sun, spot, or area. You guys can play around with it, whatever you want. I have a light right here. Let me move it. So that's one of my lights. Now we can check out what that does by looking at camera view. So over here at the right side of our screen, there's something that looks like a camera, and I'm going to toggle my camera view. So right now my camera is not actually looking at my ball, which is going to be a problem, right? I'm on frame 8, but if I go back to frame 1, we can see it's still in frame. So you're going to want to keep on toggling on and off camera mode to make sure that your camera is pointed in the right direction. If it's not, you can always move your camera. So I'm going to go out of camera mode, and I'm going to move my camera back because I think that's going to be what's going to help me. So I'm going to use my object mode select. You can see I have selected my camera, and I'm going to move it. It's a little bit difficult to see, but hopefully moving it back this way might be helpful. I can also scale my camera to make it larger. So maybe that will give us a better view. Let's take a look. This is definitely something you have to play with. That's pretty good. I would have to move it a little bit to the right. Once again, you can rotate if you want. So I'm going to rotate it to the right, or at least what looks like the right. This definitely takes some finesse. I'll let you guys know that. Not bad. I need to move it up though. Let's see if red will do that. We're definitely doing some weird stuff with our camera right now. Trying to make sure it's straight as well. Not bad. All right, so let's see. We can see actually the whole thing in here. It's not centered. If I wanted to take the time to do it, I could probably make it centered, but I'm good with that. So we're good with the camera. We have some extra lights so that our ball is lit up while we render it. And let's go check out what rendering looks like. Okay, so now that you have figured out what your render looks like, if you like the lighting, if you like where the camera position is, now let's figure out how to actually render and save it to your computer. So over here on the right, we're finally going to use this very complex set of logos here. You're going to want the one that has the little printer, it looks like. It's maybe the third down. So usually dimensions is the first thing that's open. You can just close that unless you really want to look at that. And then you're going to go to output. So output is going to show you where you want your file to be. Number one, you're going to want to change your file format. So if you are just using one file image that you want to show, JPEG is fine. But since we're doing an animation this time around, I would suggest AVI RAW. So that's going to be, usually you can play it with QuickTime, some other things like that. And I'm good with all other things here. The only thing there is to do is click which file I want to put it in. So I'm going to click the file. You can see this is part of my temp folder, but I can just go to desktop and put it there. And once I hit accept, it would choose where I want my file to be, and then I can go ahead and render and it should put it there. Okay, so now that we have our output all set, so I have it going to my desktop, I actually want it to be AVI JPEG, so that's going to be video. That's the one that opens with QuickTime Player on my computer. It should probably work for yours as well. So I'm going to hit at the top left render and then render animation. Remember, if you want to render an image, you can do that too. Either way, you just gotta make sure your output is correct. So I'm going to render my animation. So it's going to pop up in a new window and show you what the actual render looks like. But if you just want to see your frames being completed, you can see it at the bottom of your original window. Because it will say 0 to 100% and it will go frame by frame. So now I'm on frame 5, frame 6, and it's going to go until frame 10. So this little animation I made is different from the one previously because my program crashed. So just to remember, please save whenever possible because Blender will crash. It's a very complex, program, so that makes sense. And then it will be on my desktop and you'll be able to find it there because you can see at the bottom, there's nothing loading. So it's going to be at my desktop location like I want it to be using my output. So just a reminder, you have to pick your output before you can render and actually see where you saved it. So that's going to be our little printer on the right, and then you hit folder here, click where on your computer you want to save it, make sure it's somewhere easy to get to, and then make sure you're on AVI JPEG. And then hit render and render animation. So that's the steps to make sure that you can render your animation. Okay, so I want to show you guys a program that I call Mountains. This is going to be a landscape that I made, and it has a cloud, which is made out of an isosphere, and then it has a plane. So this plane is actually just what you would grab from your object mode and go to add, and then it should be under mesh, and it should be plane. I have several planes going on here, over here as well. And then I have some lighting sources. So you can see up here, I believe these are 2 point sources, and then these are 2 suns. And then I will show you what the rendered image looks like as well. Just a reminder on how to render. Make sure that your output, so put the dimensions away, your output is where you want it to be. So I have it there, and then if I want to render it, this is not an animation, so I can just render it as an image. And you want to make sure that your file format is correct. I think PNGs are fine, JPEG is fine too. And then you can just go to render image and it will save it to the location that you want to be saved. So just real quickly, when it comes to making a plane work, I just did edit mode. I did not use sculpt mode at all. And I edited it so that the different faces of my plane were extruded upwards or pushed upwards by using the move tool. So real quick, I don't believe the planes usually have more than one face, but you can split the face of your plane. Okay, so just to show you guys how to make some planes that you can turn into a landscape, I'm starting from the very beginning. We're in layout and I'm in object mode. So I'm just going to left click and delete my cube. And then I'm going to go to add, mesh, and then plane. So now my plane's pretty small and it also only has one face. And I'm going to teach you guys how to split the face so that you can more easily change it using the edit tool. All right, so I have my plane. I'm going to go to edit mode and I'm going to go to select face. So now I have my face selected. I'm going to left click it and there's something called subdivide. So if I do that, you can see that I have many different faces on my plane. I can do that as many times as I want, and it's just going to make more and more. So that's kind of like extruding, like I told you guys before, except it's going to be just splitting up the face you already have into separate faces. So that's just going to make it easier to just grab one vertex. So if I go back into vertex mode, I can just grab this one, and I can use the move tool, and I can move it up. So that's going to be our start to our mountains. That's very easy if you guys want to look into doing that. And I'm going to go back to my original animation and show you the rendered final image. Okay, so this is going to be our final image. I used rendering with my previous Blender thing that I told you guys all about how to render. And we have our light sources and that sort of thing. I have my colored faces, and you can see that my lighting still leaves a little bit to be desired. It definitely changes depending on where you put your light, but you can see some pixelation going on here. But this is the final rendered image of our landscape. Okay, really quickly, I'm going to teach you how to put color on your objects, especially with this landscape. So just a reminder, I'm in edit mode. Just as you might know, this might be at the top of your screen. It just really depends. So I'm still in edit mode. I have face select, and I've selected this little face here. As a reminder, if you hold Command or Control, depending on if you have Windows or Mac, if you hold Command and select, I can select a bunch of faces at once. Otherwise, if I don't hold Command or Control, I can only select one at once. So I'm going to select this bunch of faces, and you can see over to our right, I went to material, which is the very bottom circle. If you have a different interface, it might look like a sphere. It should be on the right still, but the icon might be different. But you're looking for the material properties tab. So I've already created some different material properties here. Basically, you just press this plus, and I'm going to have a new material. We already have a preview here, but we can change our base color. So this is where you're getting your color in the first place. So right now, you can see down here that I've chosen blue, for example, and that's going to be our surface. So this is our preview of what the material should look like. So that's our new color. As you can see, I already have my sky in the background, snow for the top of the mountains, and then this brown dirt for the actual mountains themselves. So this is just going to add to our faces right here. Okay, so looking back at my selected area, you can see a preview that it's still already green because it was grass. I can either go down here and make it the new material, or I could just pick another one here. So I'm just going to pick my brown and say that this is a dirt patch. And I have to hit assign for it to actually have the faces turn that color. So you can see that now it's brown right here. I could do that. I've selected one face here and say that there's some snow here, and I've assigned that a different color. So that's going to be your basics to how to make different colors. There's a lot of painting modes down here, but to be honest, they're really, really hard to use. So I just like using the materials tab. Once again, this is the material properties tab, to change the color of my faces or whole objects. Once again, it can be for anything. Doesn't have to be a landscape, doesn't have to be a plane. I obviously made this sphere, isosphere, a snowy color. You can do that with any of these. But just a reminder, if your colors aren't turning out well in your render image, it's probably your light sources. So you really want to get some good light sources so you can see those colors. All right, so now you can see that I'm showing you guys another project. This is just a portrait view of someone, I have no idea who, with some wacky hair, and I used sculpt to make him. So you can see the shoulders down here, the neck, and the head. Just as a show, I do want to let you guys know that I made the neck separate, I made the head separate, and then I made the shoulders separate. So these are all very separate objects. And I probably started from an isosphere if I were to guess. So I'm currently in object mode, you can see in the top left. So I'm going to swap that over to edit mode, and you can see that sculpting really changes my vertices up. So you see all those little dots, those are my vertices. So I've got plenty of faces. If I just want to use edit mode to extrude things, it would be the same if I chose this object, but to swap objects, I have to go to edit mode and select it. So now I have the head selected. So now that I go back to edit mode, you can see all the vertices on my head. So that's going to be how to deal with different objects prior to sculpting. So let's actually check out sculpting. So you go where you find object mode and edit mode, you go to sculpt mode, and we're in sculpt mode. Now there's a lot of different tools that you can use for sculpt mode. I'm going to see here we have draw, sharp, clay strips, and a bunch of different things. Depends, you can play with it, but usually it is pretty hard to use, so I never use it. So you can just see I blobbed up this side of his face. I'm going to Control Z that, and if I go down here, let's see, nothing is happening, you might notice. That's because if you remember back in object mode, I had selected the face. So I'm going to select the shoulders now and then show you guys some sculpting on that. So I've got blob. Blob is pretty good for extruding parts of the shoulders or any part there. So now it looks like something like beginning of a wing. I don't know. But yeah, blob is pretty good in that area. You can play around with these and see what they do. I usually don't like them. As a reminder, Command Z or Control Z if you are playing around and you don't like how something looks. There's a lot of different things that you can do. Pinch is fun. Grab I really like. It basically just pulls something out, but usually it looks like really weird polygons, so I'm not a fan of it. But yeah, there's a lot of different things that you can play with here. Nudge, rotate. There's a lot here, and I use that to make this guy. I am not a super good sculptor in Blender yet, but if you really don't want to play around with different faces in the edit mode, then sculpt mode is probably for you. All right, so just a few more tips. You guys might want to look up some shortcuts on your keyboard for a lot of these things, but if you are using Mac, you would want to hold the Command or Control if Windows, and just like you would scroll to move the camera, I am zooming in and out just by using my 2 fingers and moving forward because I'm holding Control and Command. If you let go of Control and Command, then you have it going like this instead. And if you're saying, well, I want to move my camera itself, move my view, you can use the hand at the top right, so over by where my image is. This hand right here, similar to the camera view, if you hold on to it and move up and down, that's going to move your view around. I find it very useful for that reason, just because this can be pretty hard to see things. It's surprising how hard it is to see things in 3D. But yeah, thank you very much for watching the video. Let me know in the comments if there's anything else that you guys would like to learn, because I know Blender can be super frustrating. If you have any questions, I can try to answer them. Thank you very much.